Hi everyone, welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Ethan. Ethan, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Great to be here. I'm Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood. I'm also a small-scale farmer in upstate New York in the USA. I have about a 30-acre apple orchard, grass-fed sheep and lamb, and shiitake mushroom operation. But at HowGood, I manage the world's largest sustainability database for food and agriculture products and run our innovation partnerships with both the biggest food companies in the world and the coolest, smallest ones, and many of the larger coalitions that are pushing forward regenerative agriculture and data and metrics as a path for transformation in the world.
Nice. And why? As in, you said you've got the biggest database of I guess, food-related data. So what? I mean, what do people do with that and why?
There are probably 4 primary use cases for our data, and it's usually used by food companies, but it's used across the supply system. So we have food manufacturers like Danone is a great partner of ours, but also we have retailers like Ahold Delhaize in the USA, which has 2,000 supermarkets in the USA. And we have partners that are upstream producers of ingredients like Ingredion, who make some of the ingredients that go into the products that the companies make, that go into the stores, that the retailers manage and get to end consumers. And so we have users across the supply system, and it's basically anyone who wants to move towards sustainability, move towards regeneration, needs good information to make decisions. If you're a business owner and you didn't have good financial data on what was happening in your business, you couldn't make decisions that would keep the business going. We're on a planet where if you don't have good sustainability data, you can't make decisions that will keep the whole planet going, that will keep all businesses in business. And so different people at different companies use our data in different ways, but primarily it's around looking at individual food products. What is their impact? What is their carbon footprint? What is their water footprint? What is their biodiversity impact? What is their labor risk? And then how do we improve our products? How do we reduce the carbon? How do we uplift human rights? How do we enhance biodiversity? And then tell that story into the marketplace. Maybe I need to change sourcing upstream, or maybe I need to reformulate my product. Then I want to be able to say, here's a certification, here's a label, here's how I can tell the average eater in the world what's so great about my product. Maybe it's water smart, maybe it's climate friendly. If those individual eaters have information that they get on the supermarket shelves, then they can make better decisions and the whole thing gets better.
Okay, nice. In theory. Where does the data come from? How can I trust the data that's in your database? How do I know that it's not, 6 years old, or that someone didn't just, stick their finger in the air and pick a number, or, talk to me about how accurate, how verified, etc. the data is.
It's a great question. HowGood has spent the last 17 years building this database from a huge number of different sources, hundreds of individual experts and PhDs who have contributed data from the best databases in the world on the impacts of food products on greenhouse gas emissions, on water, peer-reviewed scientific journal articles in all of the leading journals that are out there that are getting a really very rigorous peer review and coming out on a monthly and quarterly basis with new data from governments, from the US Department of Labor, from the EU, from the UN FAO. So these are the most vetted sources in the world. Everything HowGood does is according to internationally recognized standards. So the ISO standards for looking at the impact of products, the greenhouse gas protocol for understanding the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a large set of data, and it is variable, right? Sometimes it's from a database that's a really excellent database, but the original study did go in there 6 years ago. So more and more, what we're doing now is gathering specific primary data all the way back up to individual farm level. So we have this massive secondary database, but then we also have the ability to talk to an ingredient supplier, who works with a cooperative, who works with 100 farmers, and gather data from their farm about their sustainability impacts, and then represent that in the platform as specific primary verified data. And then we can get the whole thing assured by one of our assurance partners if you need it for auditing. So the data is massive, it is variable, but it is a very high degree of precision and assurance associated with it.
Okay, and what kind of data is it? Is it, where the crop was grown, if it's a crop? Is it what food the animal was fed, if it's animal-based? Is it location? Is it soil pH? Is it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What data are you gathering?
So yeah, those and about 16 million more data points is exactly the sort of information that we have in the system. I mean, it goes down to, the individual feeds that were used to feed a cow. It goes down to the level of exactly how many hectares of land and how much water was used to produce an individual crop in an individual location. It's holistic in terms of sustainability. So it focuses certainly on environmental factors. There's a large number of those data points. But then we also have social and economic data points. So is there labor risk in the location where this crop, where this cacao is being produced, where this banana is being produced, where this beef is being produced? What sort of labor risk is it? Is there child slave labor possibilities, or is it, a risk of discrimination and pushing against unions? We track all of that. We also look at animal welfare. How are animals being treated? What physical alterations are they experiencing? What's their feed like? What's their housing like? And we do biodiversity as well. So a lot of these are ones that are not treated by traditional life cycle analyses. We love life cycle assessment. We think it's a really great science, but it's not fast enough. It's not scalable enough for what the world is facing today. And so we have built, with machine learning and increasingly artificial intelligence, a platform that can work at scale to understand the exact impacts of any individual ingredient, from wheat to an invasive cactus harvested from the wild in Africa, and then roll those up to products, to any product that you would find on a grocery store shelf or that you might have in your refrigerator or in your pantry. We can aggregate the data in an automated way and tell you exactly what the impact is.
Fantastic. Why do I not see that information on the goods that I'm buying in the stores today?
Well, you will more and more. If you lived in the DC metro area, you'd see it in Ahold Delhaize and their giant stores in the US. If you were at COP28 in Dubai, you would have seen our carbon footprint labels directly on products. In Carrefour, the Majid Al Futtaim, which is a leading retailer in the Middle East, they have put exactly this sort of sustainability data, carbon footprints, sustainability ratings right on the shelf edge. It's only going to be spotty if companies put it on. So some companies might put a carbon footprint on their packaging, but then, the 6 other milks or yogurts or peanut butters might not have done that. So it doesn't really help you. The real key is what HowGood's been able to figure out is the partnerships with the retailers, where we assess every single product in store, hundreds of thousands of products in a store, and then provide a unified, simple, easy to understand labeling that helps me as a dad when I'm shopping with my 2 daughters, helps me make a decision quickly so that I can choose the more sustainable product for my family, for my health, and really for the whole world.
Okay, but it needs to be in the whole world, because it's great that it's in Washington. It's great that it's in Carrefour in the Middle East. But I have a Carrefour store about 500 meters away from me here, and I can go in there and it's not there. So, how do we make it? How do we make it global?
I guess, I mean, the one thing I would say is we're talking right now about the supermarket link in the system, in the supply system, the sort of grocery, the retailer. We can also talk about that same kind of decision moment for the food formulator or for the farmers. But while we're here on the retailing node, what I would say is that any retailer who wants to make more money by selling more sustainable products would do well to move in this direction. Because what we've proven over and over again when we do these rollouts in store is that the more sustainable products, which are not always more expensive, I think it's important to note, many times the own brand or the private label of a retailer are quite reasonably priced, but will score well in terms of carbon, water, biodiversity, sustainability. And the products that achieve a good or a great or a best rating from HowGood, that sort of environmental holistic summary, those products jump in sales anywhere from 25% to 45% in some trials, up to 235% in some of the trials that we've done. So more sustainable products, when there's information for consumers, for citizen eaters, shoppers, when they can see it and make a decision based on it, they buy the more sustainable stuff across economic classes, across geographies. We just did a trial in the UK. There's one ongoing, I don't have data from it quite yet, in the Middle East. It's the first of its kind there. So everywhere we do it, sustainability sells, and the retailers generally make back their investment in the program in like 3 to 4 days after implementation. They're starting to see a return. So it's really good business, and I think it's that, you might not see it because the world is now ready for it. 5 or 6 years ago, this was too early. Now, with the awareness of climate change, with the awareness of the global instability situation, people want transparency, they want data, they want information, they want to make a decision that's good for the world. So the time is ripe. It's part of why we're growing so quickly.
Yeah, great. So an example I've used on this podcast a couple of times at least is I make my coffee with Oatly milk. And the Oatly milk container tells me, to your point, it tells me it's 45 grams CO2 per litre of Oatly milk. And I have no idea whether that's fantastic or whether it's horrific, because I have cow milk beside it, which doesn't tell me its CO2 footprint. So I don't know, would the cow milk... I do know the cow milk would be significantly more. But, were I a regular consumer who has not looked into this, I wouldn't know whether one was better than the other. And the flip side of it is I can turn the containers around 180 degrees and look at the nutritional information. And that's standard. Right there, it tells you carbohydrate, it tells you protein, it tells you sodium, it tells you et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can do a complete side-by-side comparison. And that's because it's mandated. That's down to regulations here in the EU. I assume it's similar in the US and other regions as well. How soon before we get similar type cross-comparable labeling in the EU, globally, whatever? Because the only way it will be cross-comparable, I reckon, is if someone like yourself does it and you manage to sign up everybody across the world as a customer of yours, which is...
Working on it. We're working on it.
Which would be great for you. But I think more likely to get it pushed out would be global regulations, or at least regional regulations like we have for nutritional information.
Yeah. Okay, couple great points here. Yeah, we have nutrition facts panels. We need sustainability facts panels. That will only happen through a regulation, but there is significant motion in this direction. There is, just like in a number of different realms, there are retailers, a huge portion of retailers are experimenting with some form of ecological or sustainability rating system. Sometimes it's online. If you're on Amazon right now, if you shop on Amazon, they have a new sustainability attribute system that they've just rolled out, across the millions and millions of products they sell. So that immediately does make it a little more worldwide. But we also have a number of laws that are getting onto the books in Europe in particular that will push this forward. One in particular is the EU Green Claims legislation, which will structure the way that you can make claims. But at the same time, there's a number of projects pushing forward that are to create a harmonized EU-wide eco-labeling scheme that basically everyone would sign on to. Now, France is a little bit ahead on this. France has a scheme by their ADEME, their government organization that has been working on this. They've been in the lead for a while. This year, they're starting to ask for a unified eco-label for any product sold in France. And it's a pretty good one. It takes into account ecologicals, a holistic set: water, biodiversity, carbon, pollution. There's a number of different factors in there. So that'll go into effect in France this year, and then it becomes a requirement in 2025 not an ask, but a requirement, anyone who's selling in France. And that will, even before the rest of the EU gets to agreement, that will push quite a lot forward in terms of the sort of unification of it. Now, I do think, back to your initial point about Oatly, I do think that carbon is the new calorie.
Yep.
And that there will come a time when you don't need it to be on any pack. You will know, or my 7-year-old daughter, she's going to know that 0.45 is a little less than 50% lower than what your average milk is at around 1.1, 1.2 kilograms. So I think people will understand that, but it's not what I would lead with. Like a geeky decimal pointed kilogram abbreviation, what is that unit? That's not what I generally start with. We recommend something simpler, clearer to understand, something that says climate friendly or water smart, or our rating system says good, great, best, right? It's very simple. It's focused on the positives. And in that way, it ends up being more effective than what you have, for example, with Nutri-Score, which is a nutrition labeling system in the EU, which is also excellent, and there's a lot of good things about it. But it has an A, B, C, D, E, and then we're getting into the orange and the red here. And unfortunately, rating things as bad, it doesn't necessarily shift the behavior of people who are shopping. People say, well, I like those Oreos, or I like those crisps anyway, and I'm just gonna get them anyway. So what we found is that accentuating the positive and saying, good is only the top 25% of the system. There's a 75% that doesn't meet our standards, but we don't say, this is terrible, don't eat this. We just say, here's the good stuff, here's the great stuff, here's the best, this is the top 5%. And we find that very lovingly nudges behavior in a more sustainable direction.
Okay, and just to clarify, the good are maybe the top, as you said, 25%, and then what was the next one? Great and best?
Great is top 15%, and best is top 5%.
Okay. And does that mean there's still a whole bunch under there who didn't qualify to meet the good qualification? It's not that everyone who turns up gets a participation good, and it's only the ones above that. No, okay.
It's just there's nothing on it. And so you learn that means, well, okay, I won't go for that one. It's not, we're not looking to be activists. We're not looking to call anyone out that is not effective for wide-scale change in our experience. We partner equally with farmers and large international companies and activist organizations to push the whole thing forward, and we find that a collaborative approach is generally more effective than an antagonistic one.
Interesting. Okay. And what kind of sustainability factors are taken into account in this?
Great. So now we start to move from the retailer, we're starting to look back in the supply system, to the manufacturer, to the place where I can give you an exact carbon footprint in kilogram CO2 equivalent per kilogram, or I can show you the blue water usage in cubic meters of water used per metric ton, or the land occupation in hectares per metric ton. So there are 8 core metrics that go into our system, and those are greenhouse gas emissions, level of processing, water usage, land usage, soil health, biodiversity, including deforestation risk and other land use change, animal welfare, and human rights and labor risks. Those are our 8 core metrics. Many of them align with the European Product Environmental Footprint legislation, but they go beyond it because we have the social and the animal and things beyond that as well. We like a holistic picture of sustainability, and we think people care about it. We think people care that the people who made the food and grew the food were treated well and have a reasonable economic livelihood. And it doesn't make sense to us to sort of strip out social and put it somewhere else while only focusing on the environmental.
Okay, and how do you measure those things? How do you determine, biodiversity levels, whether they're good or bad? What's a good or bad biodiversity level, for example?
Yeah. So we have a concept that's called the impact spectrum, or the continuum of agricultural impacts. And I've got a article I wrote a number of years ago. I've been working on this concept since 2005 5 or something like that. And I have an article that sort of charts the development over time. But we look at a spectrum for any individual metric. Let's choose carbon for now and greenhouse gas emissions. So on that, we see a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum is the worst, the most damaging, the most polluting, the most degenerative side of the spectrum, which would be a high carbon footprint, 100 kilograms of CO2 equivalents emitted per kilogram of material, or even for things like gold, it can get up into the hundreds or thousands of kilograms emitted. But for food products, the highest you ever really see is, 100 is pretty much the high end. And then you look at the full spectrum and you say, okay, well, what's less than that? 50 is actually still pretty bad. 10, still pretty high. But then you get down to, 4 kilograms, 2 kilograms, 1 kilogram of CO2. Now we're getting close to 0. That's a net 0 point. That's the middle of the spectrum. At the middle of the spectrum, we have sustainable, we have 0. And that's zero impact, zero emissions. But then HowGood tracks beyond that. And we say, well, wait, can't we go beyond sustainability? Can we go to regeneration? Can we go to what's net positive? Can't you capture carbon through agriculture? Mm-hmm. Can't you sink it into the living biomass of the farm ecosystem and actually be net positive in that way? So HowGood tracks beyond 0. We go -1, -2, all the way up to -10 or -40 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram. That's when you have a regenerative agriculture that is sequestering carbon in the soil. Now you could do a different spectrum, same idea of a spectrum, but you can do it on biodiversity. On one end, you have deforestation in the Amazon, polluting with terrible, forever chemicals. On the other hand, you have basically adding more rainforest, not just no deforestation, that's the midpoint, that's the 0. We have adding rainforest, enhancing biodiversity, creating an agroecological, an agroforestry farm that produces a lot of food, but also, adds new biodiversity to the landscape. So we track that exact threshold, that metric, for each of our core metrics. And then depending on the crop, so whether it's cacao, a perennial shade-grown tree crop, or whether it's wheat, an annual tillage agriculture crop, or if it's chicken, right, a grain, usually grain or sometimes grass-heavy meat product, we track the impacts of the production of that individual crop across those spectrums in each location where it could be grown. It's going to use a lot more water in Spain, where you are, than it is in New York to grow a tomato. It's going to have a lot larger impact in terms of land use in Brazil and the Amazon than it is in Switzerland. And so each crop in every location, we have the data to show exactly where it sits on those metrics.
Interesting. I'm curious as well, because there's been a movement in the last few years towards large-scale indoor vertical farms. Are you working with them at all, and what do you think of them?
Sure. I mean, there's been a movement towards them, and there's been a crashing of them recently, especially the more high-tech ones. Look, indoor vertical growing can be really great on water and pesticide impact. It can have a lower footprint, though, if you fully take into account the embedded energy of building all those greenhouses, high-tech structures, then something to check there. I'm in support of it, especially if it can be diversified and localized, but it doesn't really grow much calories. This is one of the challenges with it. It's great for micronutrients and greens and really fresh, clean produce, and even strawberries, it's great. But you're not getting a lot of protein, you're not getting a lot of good carbs. Like, it's the bulk of the mass of what human beings eat is not generally produced in them. Overall, I'm in support. I think they're excellent. They generally score quite well in our systems. The localization as opposed to the globalization of them can be really excellent. But are they a panacea to what we're facing in the world? Unfortunately not.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And we're on the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast. So talk to me a little bit about, the importance of this for supply chains. If I'm a supply chain manager, how does this impact me?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Supply chains have been opaque, right? They've been hard to see. Everybody's got their cards close to their chest. They don't want to digitize it. They like their pen and paper and their handshake. Like it is in some ways a beautifully conservative part of the food industry. I think one useful thing to note from our perspective is that actually the word supply chain is not the most useful way to think about it, because they aren't chains. Chains don't actually exist in natural systems, and they're kind of just one way, link to link to link. It's more like a supply web or a supply network or a supply system, because it's much more complex and interconnected than anybody thought it was when they were calling it a supply chain. Also, there's a history of supply chain in that we actually sadly used to chain people up to produce the goods that we move through the supply chain. And even today, I mean, there are millions still in modern slavery. So we don't use the word supply chain because we think it creates the mind that thinks about it wrong to solve for what we're actually facing, which is a complex network or web. And so part of HowGood's work is to be the social network for sustainability data, so that you can pass. You don't give up all your IP. This isn't about sharing all your data openly everywhere, but you can pass the appropriate information for somebody to make a decision upstream or downstream from you through the system in a more comprehensive and trusted way. So if you're a supply chain, if you're a supply system manager at a major food company or any food company, and you're looking upstream and you have very low visibility into where things are coming from and what the impacts are, it's hard then for you to make a decision to lower your carbon footprint. And now with science-based targets for carbon and for nature, now with regulations and investors coming in and saying, you've got to be lowering your footprint, more and more this is landing on supply chain professionals to solve things, to make a difference, to reduce the carbon footprint, to reduce the labor risk. And these women and men who are in that role have not had a lot of data to make decisions on. Sure, they get price and they know quality and they get terms and they can negotiate the logistics, but they need sustainability intelligence at their hands, at their fingertips, just like they need business intelligence in order to say, I've got 16 suppliers, which of them has the lowest carbon footprint for this sugar or this beef? Because then I could make a decision where I don't even have to change my products, but just switching a supplier, or not switch a supplier. Why don't you engage with your supplier and say, look, here for your crop, here's the 6 top recommendations for abatement strategies you could use to lower the impact of your product. Would you like to pick out 2 or 3 of them and we'll go at it together and see what we can reduce? Most companies we work with would rather engage their suppliers than change to a different supplier. Yeah. And so for all of that, you need unbiased data that can be assured so you can understand the current impacts, make decisions in the right direction, and then gather more detailed primary data in collaboration with your upstream suppliers over time.
It's interesting that you use the word can be assured with respect to the data, because increasingly regulations are going to require reporting and assurance and auditing of data the same way financial reports are required to be reported today, no?
I mean, it's so close to here, you basically have to be acting like it's here. Specifically, the EU deforestation regulation, which singles out 6 high impact commodities: beef, palm oil, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and soy. So it singles those out to start. But the onus that it puts on companies working with, or even in some cases making products with those ingredients, you have to be able to trace the individual lots of material back through the supply system with chain of custody to the farm where they were produced. You need to have a polygon, an outline of the map of that farm. And once you have that, you then have to be able to say, no deforestation happened on this plot of land post 2020 is what the law says. Yep. And if you get caught out not having that in the EU, the fine is 4% of your revenues. Yeah. That's a big stick, right? That's significant. Nobody wants to get to the end of the year feeling like they had a good year of growth at 3%, get hit by a fine and realize that they're down a point. That's like that. Nobody wants that. And so this is a really significant legislation that's coming into force in 2025 and is going to require the rapid digitization, the rapid upskilling in terms of technologies and software that companies are using to be able to track to this level of detail. There's going to be a lot of challenges with it. both from the companies that will be hit the hardest, the processors, the ingredient traders, but then also up to individual smallholder farmers in the supply systems, who might be producing coffee, and this is seen as an undue burden on them. So either way, because of that financial penalty that's sort of staring at everybody in the coming years, there's going to be a massive movement in this direction. In fact, if your company isn't moving in this direction, you kind of get on it, because it's going to take a while to get the system set up to do the tracking. My hunch is once the 6 high impact commodities, once we've been going for a little bit there, I think then people will say, oh, okay, this is doable. There is software out there that can help me do this traceability. There is software out there that I can see the value of being able to say EUDR compliant, deforestation free product. There will be a marketing benefit to that, right? So I think people will see the value, see that the software tech tools are there, and this is leading me towards AI and artificial intelligence a bit, but maybe we'll save that. And I think there will be more ingredients that it's required of. And in the not too distant future, it'll just become the norm to have that level of data visualization, transparency, traceability in global supply systems. And certainly the companies that do it first will get the benefits of being the leaders.
Nice. And, having mentioned AI, et cetera, and all the new technologies that are out there, and as the innovation officer for HowGood, what's next? What's coming down the line that, is exciting and interesting and supply chain people should be, all excited about?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, I saw a Nobel Prize-winning economist speak recently about artificial intelligence along with scientists from Google. And they described that artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology, especially the generative artificial intelligence, Gen AI, a general purpose technology on the order of electricity and computers. Right. And that the massive shifts that we saw in the world with the introduction of electricity and computers, we're in the early stages of it here with generative AI. So HowGood is leading this work, especially this particular intersection of food, artificial intelligence, and impact, food, artificial intelligence, and sustainability. We're right at that nexus. We've convened conversations at Climate Week, at COP, the climate conference, at Davos, and a number of events this year will be focusing on this exact intersection. There's 3 levels of work that I see supply chain professionals and the broader food and agriculture industry can work with, but actually this is across any industry. You could see these 3 levels. The first one is efficiency, where you can just do things that you currently do a lot faster and easier. Querying large data sets with natural language as opposed to running through spreadsheets, you can just ask the AI for it. Writing and sifting through and figuring out what the best RFP is. AI will get so good and fast at doing that. There'll be AIs writing the RFPs, there'll be AIs responding to them, right? So all of this is in efficiency. Then there's a level which is innovation. And this is where I spend a bunch of time. It's great to do the things that we already do more quickly, and Gen AI helps with that immensely. All the data coming out shows productivity increases from it. Innovation is about really doing new things. And so, we're looking at it for things like, here's a product, or here's a portfolio, here's a supply chain portfolio. You're buying 200 materials from 50 countries and 1,000 suppliers. If I wanted to decarbonize by 15% and reduce my land usage and water impact while maintaining my current prices overall, what's the best way to do that? In our platform, you'll be able to click a button and click optimize, and the AI will run through all of the options, all the different suppliers, all the different sourcing locations, all the ingredient swaps you could consider, everything that you've got, and then come up with a quick set of recommendations. Try this, try this, try this, and you'll interact with it. You'll be able to say, oh, thumb that up, that's a good recommendation, or no, that doesn't make sense, my company can't do that. And then the AI will start, this is machine learning now, it will start to learn you and what your company can do, and then make better and better recommendations going forward. So this is I just talked about it from a supply chain level. Imagine that same thing happening at an individual product reformulation level, or at a portfolio of products level, or for a retailer who wants to decarbonize and needs to change their category mix. or for an ingredient supplier who's looking at what new crops they want to be making into ingredients and selling into the market, innovation is going to be incredibly useful there. And then just one last little bit on it. The third level that I've identified is the level of transformation, which is where you see actual transformational, really big phase shifts in the industry come from generative AI. And I'll be honest and say we haven't seen any of them yet. It's a little nascent. I'm looking for it every day. I'm thinking about it and saying, where is that transformational impact that really totally changes the game? So if you see one, if you hear about it, I'd love to hear about it. And I think there's a lot of potential in what we can do with AI for this profession and realm of work.
Yeah, great, superb. We are coming towards the end of the podcast now, Ethan. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
There's two realms I'd like to touch. One is about the granularity of data. And we've explained that we go from secondary data towards primary data, and then companies are looking upstream in their supply system, getting more and more detailed. What's actually happening? What's the agricultural practices on the ground? What kind of abatement strategies are you trying out? And what's happening in carbon, in water, and biodiversity? One thing that's great is that we have a now globally unified set of metrics to track the impacts of agriculture. The Sustainable Markets Initiative that HowGood is part of authored 2 reports, but one recently that has the 5 top metrics for regenerative agriculture, and they're very straightforward metrics. And they align with the One Planet Business for Biodiversity, with the SCI platform, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform. They align with the global farm metrics. So we're getting at a high level, a small, tight set of metrics that every company should be measuring, every ingredient we should be measuring it for. But when it comes to granularity, what some of our partners are finding, especially the ingredient suppliers who have traditionally been a little, reticent to share some of their data from their farm systems, what they're finding is because there's demand from the CPGs and from the retailers for this level of information, the ingredient suppliers that come forward first and say, here's our carbon footprint, here's our water footprint, here's our biodiversity impact, that's seen as a benefit because they're differentiating themselves on sustainability. And then the companies that aren't disclosing that sort of information, they're just getting slapped with the industry average worst case scenario for beef or for coffee or for whatever. And so by disclosing more, you get a more intimate connection with your customer. And what we're seeing is that whole thing is speeding up because we have 6 of the 10 largest food companies in the world using our platform. Now they're asking data from the ingredient suppliers. Instead of ingredient suppliers having to answer 6 different surveys or 17 different surveys about that data from every single manufacturer out there, they can now come to one place, enter their data once, and it gets distributed to all the users in the format with the metrics they wanted. So again, this is that social network of sustainability that's speeding up and helping everybody valorize and get the value out of the good sustainability initiatives and work and transparency that they have done on their ingredients. Now, mostly that's on carbon, but the last sort of leg and point I wanted to make is that this is all coming for biodiversity too. We have science-based targets for nature releasing their biodiversity guidance. The GRI, more on the investor side, just released their nature and biodiversity reporting requirements. We have a COP16, the Conference of the Parties 16, for biodiversity happening in Colombia at the end of this year, right before the climate COP. So biodiversity is rising. So if you're feeling like you're just barely getting your arms around carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, well, hopefully you learned a lot there because it's going to be required, I think, soon. And there's an upside if you're leading in it on the biodiversity side as well. And of course, biodiversity and carbon are deeply interwoven, and we shouldn't really look at them separately. So I think this is a net benefit, and hopefully what the industry has learned on carbon will be able to transfer and speed up on biodiversity soon. And if you need help, I happen to know of a place that has a lot of data that could be supportive.
Which leads me nicely to my last question. Ethan, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
HowGood website's a great start. There's a huge amount of information in our help centers and in our video, our own podcast that we do. So there's a lot there on the HowGood website. And then you can find me haunting on LinkedIn around various water coolers there and putting out everything I find on the leading edge of innovation, artificial intelligence, food, and impact. So connect with me there and send me a note.
Perfect. Great. Ethan, that's been fantastic. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a blast.